Welcome to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. In this podcast, we break down high-profile celebrity estate planning cases for advisors and their clients. Most celebrity estate catastrophes are based on the same issues that everyday people face, just with the volume turned up. Our goal is to identify and extract the individual estate planning issues that lie at the heart of each story. We then discuss what advisors should expect and how to avoid common pitfalls. Hosted by WealthManagement.com Senior Editor David.lenok.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of WealthManagement.com's Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous. For anyone new to the podcast, in each installment, myself and a guest take on a different celebrity estate and attempt to extract some key lessons that planners can apply to their more traditional clients. The idea being that celebrity estate planning stories, although often ridiculous in their details, generally have at their cores very basic issues that could just as easily apply to non-famous or fabulously wealthy clients. To learn more about estate planning and how you can better serve your clients, visit wealthmanagement.com/trusts-estates. Our monthly journal features tax law updates, wealth planning, retirement planning, and much more, written by thought leaders in the industry. That's wealthmanagement.com/trusts-estates. Our guest today is Shawn Goheen. Shawn is a partner at Goheen Companies, a premium life insurance company. With more than 30 years of experience, he's become nationally recognized as a leader in the premium life insurance space, providing solutions to estate tax issues and helping high net worth individuals preserve their financial legacies. Over the years, he's built exclusive relationships with more than 20 banks and insurance characters, in addition to many financial advisors. Shawn prides himself on being an advisor to advisors, and he regularly collaborates with financial professionals looking to elevate their practice with new opportunities. Thanks so much for joining us, Shawn.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the subject of today's episode is actress Shannen Doherty. Shannen first entered the public consciousness as a child actor on TV's Little House on the Prairie in 1982. And her star turn began later in the decade, first with her role as one of the titular Heathers in the 1989 movie of the same name, and in the role she's perhaps best known for as Brenda Walsh on TV's Beverly Hills 90210. After leaving that show acrimoniously in 1994, which is sort of a common theme throughout her career, Doherty spent a long stretch in the Hollywood wilderness before scoring another major role as Prue Halliwell on another Aaron Spelling-produced TV series, Charmed. In March 2015, Doherty was diagnosed, sadly, with stage 3 breast cancer, which had spread to her lymph nodes already when she found out. According to Doherty, her employer at the time had failed to make her insurance payments on time, and that caused her coverage to lapse from 2014 to 2015, and that resulted in the cancer not being diagnosed until it had already spread beyond being really treatable. Sadly, Shannen Doherty passed on July 13th, 2024, at the too young age of 53. Doherty's estate is interesting not just because of her fame and fortune, but also because she filed and finalized her divorce from her now ex-husband, Kurt Iswarienko, the day before she passed away. Iswarienko signed the agreement the very next day. By finalizing the divorce, Doherty regained control over significant assets that could then be passed on by her designated beneficiaries according to her estate plan, as opposed to having to first divvy things up in the divorce and then the remainder would be divvied up by her estate plan. Had the divorce not been finalized really in the nick of time, Iswarienko could have made a play for her estate, which was rumored to be in the millions. The high ticket item here is her Malibu home, according to court records, that was worth about $6 million. In California, if a spouse dies in the middle of a divorce, the family court immediately loses jurisdiction and probate rules take over. So it doesn't matter sort of where the divorce was in progress. If someone dies, all of that goes away. What's striking here, beyond simply the timing, is that the couple were actually able to put aside their differences and get the divorce done purely for estate planning purposes up against such a sadly literal deadline. We often stress on this show that estate planning often happens early and often and should remain flexible, largely because you're dealing with such volatile and emotional issues as family, money, and of course, death. That Doherty and her husband were able to pull things together and finalize what had previously been an acrimonious divorce to really act as the exception that proves the rule. Most clients won't be able to replicate this. I'm a firm believer that advisors should be on the front line of the estate planning process, both for the benefits of their clients and their own practices. So Shawn, what are some strategies advisors can implement with their own clients to mitigate estate planning issues, hopefully earlier in their life and not sort of at the last minute, sort of like Shannen had to?
So what a rarity, first of all, that they would work this out the day before. So that never happens, which is amazing that the husband took that route, which their family should be thankful for. But what we find out in the whole marketplace is that a lot of people don't like to look at death and take their planning steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way through the ending process. And what I expect advisors to, in almost every single meeting that we go into with advisors, we always ask the question, do you have updated wills? Do you have directed power of attorney to durable powers for medical? Everything has to be discussed up front in that first meeting to find out where these people stand on their planning. So one of the key steps in our process is to make sure we get the wills and trusts done up front. And that's an important step to any and all beginning of our planning starts with a new client and or clients that are in play.
So, as a, say I'm a financial advisor and, I want to have this sort of holistic, right? That's our fun buzzword in the industry now, relationship with our clients and be sort of, the trusted advisor. And I know that seems to be involving estate planning nowadays, but I'm a little skittish, right? I mean, I don't want to inadvertently practice law. What are some of the first sort of steps that financial advisors can take, sort of the safest, let's say, not that any of this is all that risky, but the sort of the safest steps for a financial advisor to start sort of incorporating, keeping track of these sort of estate planning issues for their clients into their practice?
So first step always is just to ask the questions to the clients, right? Find out where they sit and where they stand on their feelings towards family, relationships, businesses. You got to really get to know the client first. And a lot of times advisors want to just jump into purchasing insurance versus really getting the planning steps involved at the beginning. And if you do all this at once, talk about the personal needs, the business needs, and then the family relationships or dynamics, this will get you steps ahead of most advisors, because most people really just go in for the sale of insurance products and or other investment strategies versus going into the planning process. And it takes some time to learn how to ask the direct questions and the right questions. But once you get good at it, it's so easy, and people actually, you can ask a few questions and they'll lead the meeting from then on, because they love to talk about themselves and their business and their personal family members, usually, if they're open up to planning.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I feel like estate planning has really bad PR, and that's sort of one of the things that keep both people and from doing it and from advisors from incorporating it into their practices. But every advisor is concerned about, they want to find out the most about the client. They want to know where all the assets are. They want to know what they have, what they don't have. And they want to meet that next generation of the family, because everyone's worried that, when their client dies, the kids will fire him, because that tends to be what happens. And sort of this initial question asking part of dipping your toes into the estate planning is actually a really helpful way to sort of, just get the important estate planning information, out, but also to sort of backdoor your way into those other things in a non-sinister way, and sort of create that deeper relationship with the client and with necessarily with the next generation, because that's how estate planning works, that you normally, necessarily might not have sort of had a natural way to do without looking like you were sort of trying to sell them or yourself.
You 100% have to have that natural personality that has that trustworthiness, and they can feel that right up front, right? And if you ask the right questions, the direct questions, you'll usually get a great response. It's when you become salesy and pushing the wrong buttons at the wrong time is really when these things kind of fall apart, and you can really watch their nonverbals and see if you're losing the client in the meeting, right? And sometimes we have to redirect our advisors to say, hey, slow it down, move to this direction, or let them talk more. It's more likely than not is listening to your client or your prospect. And that's what I find most people cannot do.
Yeah, that's a great point, that let them talk. I think it's kind of just a good way to converse in general. You find out more about people from them than you ever could just by asking them questions. They'll offer more.
100%.
But also, it's from the attorney side of things. That's where I come from. I can tell you that estate planning attorneys have been doing this since time immemorial, and they are not the most socially adept people by and large. I don't know if you've met many estate planning attorneys, but it's a lot of tax guys. It's a lot of numbers people, previously, not so much anymore now that, the industry is changing and they need to be a bit more social and a bit more of a psychologist rather than a bean counter.
Exactly.
But, and they've figured out ways to do it. And a lot of it is just by you ask a question and then you kind of let the client go. And that's the nice thing about these estate planning questions is that they're so open-ended and they haven't really, since people are so scared to think about them, they haven't. And so when you first, ask them, it then will just naturally create more questions in their head, which then they will either answer to you right then, just in sort of train of consciousness, or they will go home and sort of start having like, hey, we should think about this. And like, they'll kind of, it snowballs a little bit is what I'm saying in an awkward way, more so than just asking them about, their finances might.
We were just in a meeting prior to us getting on this call, and it was a 35-year-old guy that owns a scrap metal company, and he's got a partner out of Mexico. He owns 60%. The individual owns 40%. The Mexico company owns 40%. And I had my daughter with me, and she works with me, Morgan. And I asked a simple question. I said, you're getting married next year. Do you have any wills or trusts in place? No. Do you have a buy-sell agreement? What's that? Right. And you would think somebody that's doing 30 million annually would be at this young age would already have somebody in his ear trying to get some documents, wills, trust, and or buy-sell agreements in place. He knew nothing. Yeah. And I asked one simple question. I go, bang, you're dead today. I pointed my finger, shot him, and said, hey, you're dead. What happens? I said, who takes on the debt of the company? And he just blank stared me. And I said, this is something you got to really consider. And I see this all the time with business owners. They don't have their buy-sells done. They don't have their planning done. And it causes a train wreck after someone does pass away accidentally or way earlier than they should have, as this one individual that you're just talking about. So I definitely believe you have to get this stuff out and talk about it and teach the advisors how to ask the right questions at the right time.
Yeah, I think it's especially important. I think as you're highlighting, I don't know for a fact that this person is a first generation wealth creator, but I'm intuiting that he is.
And, he was. Yeah, that's interesting, right?
And so I think that group in particular is especially vulnerable to this because they don't, when someone comes from money, there's a certain inbuilt amount of training towards it, even if it's not on purpose. They sort of just see what's happening around them, and there may already be things in place that they had nothing to do with. But B, like when you're concentrating your entire life around build and putting your whole soul into building something that is capable of creating $30 million in revenue, that's kind of all you're thinking about, right? You're thinking about creating it, then growing it, and then maintaining it. And the idea of what I'm going to do if I'm not part of it anymore is like, it's so far from their mind to be sort of like almost unthinkable for them, because that's sort of the mentality that it takes to be successful in that kind of endeavor.
You're exactly dead on correct. And especially with the younger generation, I was telling him, I said, my daughter forgot to bring a HIPAA and informal. And in our business, that's just my way of finding out what his health standards look like, because he agreed that he needed insurance. And I said, before we do insurance, we need to talk, which we already did, the wills, the trusts, and estate planning. But the second part of it is he insurable? So we also went into the step of, I need to have an informal HIPAA filled out, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, long story short, it is impossible for us, this first generation, as you're saying, to get them to move quickly on anything. So we are trying to educate these young people as best we can to how to get them off step 1, step 2, and step 3. And that's a huge problem. That's because these kids are inheriting all our wealth down the road. So I wish more young people would get educated more on this process of taking care of their planning.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned both sort of, we're talking about these wealth creators and and the next generation. And I think that's another thing that often can be, if they're ignoring the estate planning, a lot of times you have these people where the business sort of becomes their child. And if the next generation, quote unquote, isn't necessarily in the business, it can sort of be neglected a little bit in terms of the relationship, a little bit in terms of just financial education, like you said. So that's another way that estate planning can kind of come in, is it can kind of make force these these wealth creators whose child has sort of become the business to pay a little more attention, both personally and sort of planning wise, to their own actual children.
Yeah, I think it'd be fun sometime for you to have a podcast with some of these younger wealthy people and really get into their mind. I haven't ever heard a podcast with somebody that's going to inherit a bunch of money or have somebody that's really built their wealth over the past 5-10 years under the age of 40. I'd love to see you pick apart and ask them where their head is and what their feelings are about why they haven't stepped into the planning, because that might help other people think about that more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting point of view for advisors to be able to sort of be a fly in the wall for, right? Maybe something we'll pull together.
Yeah, 100%. I probably have 2 or 3 of those you could probably interview, and they'd be great, because some of them are worth 40-50 million dollars. This one young kid right now he's in his 20 millions, 20-30 million range currently, but going to be 60 and 80. But we have some that are inheriting 100-200 million from ranch money, oil money. And it's the hardest thing for me to do is to get him even to get term insurance on him, right? He's got some wills done, but that's it. And he just he putting off the inevitable death part, right?
So
and that's the trust word.
Insurance is your business, and we've brought it up a couple of times. So let's sort of like expanding a little bit how it sort of fits into the estate planning equation, right? Like obviously estate planning itself could be thought of sort of as its own kind of insurance, right? I guess against probate and against lack of control. But sort of actual insurance, where does that fit in the broader scheme of an estate plan?
So once we find out the net worth, gone through their personal financial statements, know all about their thought processes and what their family design looks like, we do start talking about the life insurance piece. Sometimes we do it faster when we get more information up front, but a lot of times we start backing into what insurance looks like and what kind of policies are available, right? Term insurance to permanent insurance and the different types of products. And we always try to educate. And a lot of times these people maybe they don't have a ton of cash because they're putting it all back in the business. So we may start out with a lot of term insurance that's convertible down the road, but always we definitely see the importance of life insurance, paying pennies on the dollars now at young ages so that they can have this all their tax planning done prior to 50, because we can make these policies grow up, as they get older, death benefits go up. So we always plan with some type of insurance if there's a need there. And it's always based on insurability, of course, too.
Yeah, and I think insurance, and especially in sort of a higher end estate planning capacity, it's a tool, right? It's not just in the estate plan, you're not necessarily using insurance in the same way as sort of the average person would, where it's like, I want to be sure I can pay for the funeral.
Exactly.
This is there are tax ramifications. It interacts in a certain way. If you're up against the federal estate tax, money and insurance interacts in a certain way with those exemptions. And so there is, other than just the cash payout at the end, there are reasons, and insurance is a tool for performing a number of functions in an estate plan.
And I think and you're dead on. And I think that if you work with people like yourself and their CPAs and their investment advisors, and whoever's the quarterback works with the whole team, so everybody's working on that same plan at the same time, is the best way for planning to work out correctly. Because then everybody knows that, hey, I'm not stepping on the CPA's foot. I'm not stepping on the attorney's foot. I'm not stepping on the financial advisor. I'm not stepping on the insurance guy's foot. If everybody knows what they're doing, what their roles are, it works beautifully. It's when you have somebody's throwing arrows into stuff for all different types of reasons. But I think if you have the whole team working as a group, it's a wonderful way for an experience for people to enjoy planning.
Yeah. I think the industry is sort of cyclical in that regard, in terms of people go from being very siloed and not wanting to send your client across the street, even if it's not for something that you necessarily do, to now sort of the family office model is sort of all the rage, and this idea of where we can be your all-encompassing advisor. And so it's interesting to see all the different ways that these advisor teams, and really there need to be teams, if we're being honest with this, especially with a high net worth client. It's just too complicated for a person to handle anymore. Like those days, if they ever really existed, are now long over. And anyone who's trying to do that is probably doing a bit of a disservice to their clients. And that makes this position of quarterback that you've mentioned so important, right? So make sure that everyone knows who's running things, and that there's no advisors don't like losing control. They're worried about losing their clients. They don't like, other people knowing more than them about their clients. And it's just, there's a natural, and this is just for all financial professionals, a sort of a natural air of competition in there that needs to be tamped down for the best, for the best interests of the client. It's like a football team, right? There's one ball. So
That's right.
everyone wants the ball. There's only, someone has to decide who gets them and then keep everyone happy if they don't happen to be getting the ball in that moment.
It's super interesting that how many different moving parts there are in the planning process. But what we're also running into currently is a lot of people are renting CFOs, right? Yep. Well, CFO might look at our plan and go, I don't understand this. I don't know it. And how do I navigate through this whole planning that you've started? And they start punching, holes through it, but they haven't been through the whole process with the whole team before. And you got to be cognizant of who's coming into people's lives at all times. And that means staying in touch with your clients.
Yep.
So that's a very important piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's the bonuses and pitfalls of bringing someone in from the outside, right? I mean, they lack the perspective that you have, which is a negative, but also they lack the perspective that you have, and that they may not, you may be too close to the thing that you made. That happens all the time. You only can't see the forest for the trees because you've been working on something for so hard. Bring an outside person, sometimes we'll see something that's super obvious to them that because you've been working on it for so long, just sort of, you've subconsciously like tuned it out. It's a similar role that what a corporate trustee can bring as opposed to a personal trustee. But again, bringing in outsiders, especially to family-based businesses, often can be, as you said, it can be fraught with peril. You really have to be careful, who you're introducing into the equation.
Well, and I'll give it, I won't go into the whole story, but using professional athletes as an example, you'll find that they might have 7, 8, 9 people in their entourage of people that are working around their circle. But when you really get down to the nuts and bolts of it, a lot of these people take advantage of these athletes because they really hand it off to the agent. The agent now goes and gets all his buddies to do the investments. You don't know who's getting paid and how they get paid, right? You got to are they managing the products properly, the insurance designs? All that stuff comes to play. And we've seen so much litigation coming out the last 2 years on this. And it's so important for you to understand when you do have an entourage of people in a team, making sure that they're doing the right things at the right time for the right reasons. And it's so important to keep an eye on that.
So, we're coming up towards the end of this. But just, I want to sort of leave us with sort of another sort of big question for people to think about. And, with estate planning, a lot of what people are trying to do other than passing on just the money is this idea of legacy, right? Of passing on legacy to the next generation. Do you mind sort of talking about sort of the importance of legacy and sort of how, individuals, some ways, they can sort of try to sort of protect the legacy that they're putting out there?
So working with a firm like yours, for example, they come to you, they ask you, hey, I've got $50 million, $30 million, $10 million, $5 million coming to my family. What do I do? Mm-hmm. And who do I care? And then you're going to come back and say, well, who do you care about? And you got to find out who they care about, what that role looks like, and what role you're going to play in that dynasty planning, meaning the individual, and the attorney yourself is going to navigate that process down step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and find out what's the most important thing to happen. And as our job on the planning side of legacy is to work with you and say, we believe that the estate tax is going to be this. You're going to owe this. So how are you going to pay the taxes? You're going to sell a lot. Are you going to sell real estate? Are you going to sell investments? Or are you going to use life insurance? Right. So working, again, it's all about working with the team. But when you know the client well enough to navigate what's the best for them at that time, that's what makes this work out perfectly for dynasty planning and planning down the road, by making sure the taxes are taken care of, that they have plenty of money to live on after the death of that person, and it's planned out properly.
Absolutely. Well, that's about all the time we have. I'd like to thank our guest, Shawn Goheen, for coming on and sort of unpacking a very sort of vast topic here. I've asked him some very broad questions that he's handled with aplomb. So thank you for coming on, Shawn.
This was great. I really appreciate the opportunity and look forward to having more with you.
For all the listeners out there, I'll see you, or I guess you'll hear me on the next episode of Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous.
Thank you for listening to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. Click the subscribe button below to become notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Informa WealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.